Hello, hello. It's been a very long time since doing one of these readings. I am doing this at 11 o'clock at night with absolutely no prelude. So I don't expect anyone to be here. But, oh, right as I said that, a friend appeared. Hello, friend. Um, Anyways, I just really today felt the need for some devastating prose. I went to a bookshop and they had a copy of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is a real book. And I just read like the first paragraph, and the prose was truly devastating. So I'll be buying that at some point, but not a $24 hardcover version of it. But yeah, that's what brings me here tonight is I just wanted to read some prose. If I have a friend with me, that's nice. If not, that's also okay. It'll be out there. But I really like reading aloud. And I wanted to do it. So if you come to this at a later time, hello and thank you. And if not, thanks internet for being there for me to put too much of myself online. It's a problem. But it's my problem. Okie dokie. I have some brownie here. I don't know how long I'm going to read for. I also don't remember what happened last time we were here. So, the last time, I believe they were talking about two sisters. One sister is extremely religious, one sister is not extremely religious, the younger sister. And is basically, they were having like a sort of fight about jewelry, where the older sister was like, this jewelry is really pretty and I want to wear it, but is that against my religious morals? And the younger sister's like, what if we could just wear jewelry? What if instead of having this big philosophical fight with ourselves, we could just wear our mother's jewelry? And that was a lot to ask of the eldest sister. So let me see if I can remember who's who in this. I believe Miss Brooke is the extremely religious one. Dorthea? No, okay, I think Dorthea, which is probably not how you pronounce that, is the extremely religious one, and Celia is the non-religious one. And I don't really think that I'm going to remember a lot about the plot, but the point is the prose at this point and not the plot. And I could have done some research, but instead of doing that, I blatantly did not do any research. So that's where we are tonight. So get ready for a bedtime story with me. Okie dokie. I don't love this angle for you, but I don't know what else to do about it. I feel like you should always be able to see at least a little bit of the book, you know? That's my thought. All right. Middlemarch, Chapter 3, Volume 1, Chapter 3. And this is a little pre-chapter thing from Paradise Lost. Say, goddess, what ensued when Raphael, the affable archangel, and it says Eve. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that it's Eve speaking now or what. The story heard attentive and was filled with admiration and deep muse to hear of things so high and strange. Paradise Lost. One of my very good friends really likes Paradise Lost, so I can consult her in a future date. Okay. If it had really occurred to Mr. Cosbon to think of Miss Brooks as a suitable wife for him, the reasons that might induce her to accept him were already planted in her mind, and by the evening of the next day the reasons had budded and bloomed. For they had had a long conversation in the morning, while Celia, who did not like the company of Mr. Cosbon's moles and sallowness, had escaped to the vicarage to play with the curate's ill-shod but merry children. I remember now, Dorthea is really into this guy, Mr. Cosbon, who is like old, but she's like really into his mind, which I get. And Celia's like, he's gross though, and Dorothea's like, but his mind. And Celia's like, but he's physically gross. And Dorothea's like, I don't want your opinion on this or pretty much anything. I really want to drink my tea, but I'm worried it's too hot. I'm going to suffer the consequences. It was okay. Okay. Dorothea by this time had looked deep into the ungauged reservoir of Mr. Casaubon's mind, seeing reflected there in vague labyrinthine, oh, I love that word that I'm not pronouncing even remotely, okay, in vague labyrinthine extension of every quality she herself brought, had opened much of her own experience to him, and had understood from him the scope of his great work, also of attractively labyrinthine extent. For he had been as instructive as Milton's affable archangel, and with something of the archangelic manner he told her how he had undertaken to show what indeed had been attempted before, but not with that thoroughness, justice of comparison, and effectiveness of arrangement at which Mr. Casaubon aimed, that all the mythical systems or erratic mythical fragments in the world were corruptions of tradition originally revealed. Having once mastered the true position, and taken a firm footing there, the vast field of mythical constructions became intelligible, nay, luminous with the reflected light of correspondence. I don't know what's happening, to be totally frank. But to gather in this great harvest of truth was no light or speedy work. His notes already made a formidable range of volumes, but the crowning task would be to condense these voluminous, still accumulating results and bring them, like the earlier vintage of the Hippocratic books, to a fit little shelf. In explaining this to Dorothea, Mr. Casaubon expressed himself nearly as he would have done to a fellow student, for he had not two styles of talking at command. It is true that when he used a Greek or a Latin phrase, he always gave the English with scrupulous care. But he would probably have done this in any case. A learned provincial clergyman is accustomed to think of his acquaintances as of lords, knights, and other nobles and worthy men that cone Latin but little. Dorthea, there was really some really wild spellings in that last phrase. I don't know if you can see any of it. Dorothea was altogether captivated by the wide embrace of this conception. Here was something beyond the shallows of ladies' school literature. Here was a living Bosset, whose work would reconcile complete knowledge with devoted piety. Here was a modern Augustine who united the glories of doctor and saint. The sanctity seemed no less clearly marked than the learning, for when Dorothea was impelled to open her mind on certain themes, which she could speak of to no one whom she had before seen at Tipton, especially on the secondary importance of ecclesiastical, I think I did that okay, forms and articles of belief compared with that spiritual religion, that submergence of self in communion with divine perfection, which seemed to her to be expressed in the best Christian books of wildly distant ages. She found in Mr. Casaubon a listener who understood her at once, who could assure her of his own agreement with that view when duly tempered with wise conformity, and could mention historical examples before unknown to her. He thinks with me, said Dorothea to herself, or rather he thinks a whole world of which my thought is but a poor two-penny mirror. And his feelings, too, his whole experience. What a lake compared with my little pool. Miss Brooke argued from words to dispositions not less unhesitatingly than other young ladies of her age. Signs are small measurable things, but interpretations are illimitable. And in girls of sweet, ardent nature, every sign is apt to conjure up wonder, hope, belief, vast as sky, and colored by a diffused thimbleful of matter in the shape of knowledge. Wow, what a phrase! They are not always too grossly deceived, for Sinbad himself may have fallen by good luck on a true description, and wrongful reasoning sometimes lands poor mortals in right conclusions, staring a long way off the true point, but proceeding by loops and zigzags, we now and then arrive just where we ought to be. Because Miss Brooke was hasty in her trust, it is not therefore clear that Mr. Casaubon was unworthy of it. He stayed a little while longer than he had intended, on a slight pressure of invitation from Mr. Brooke, who offered no bait except his own documents on machine breaking and rick burning. Mr. Casaubon was called into the library to look at these in a heap, while his host picked up first one and then the other to read aloud from in a skipping and uncertain way, passing from one unfinished passage to another with a "Yes, now, but here," and finally pushing them all aside to open the journal of his youthful continental travels. "Look here. Look here. Here is all about Greece, Roms, the ruins of Romulus. You are a great Grecian now. I don't know whether you have given much study to topography. I spent no time in making out these things. Helicon now. Here now. I don't know what's happening. We started the next morning for Parnassus, the double-peaked Parnassus. All this volume is about Greece, you know." Mr. Brooke wound up, rubbing his thumb transversely along the edges of the leaves as he held the book forward. Mr. Casaubon made a dignified, though somewhat sad audience, bowed in the right place, and avoided looking at anything documentary as far as possible, without showing disregard or impatience, mindful that this desultoriness was associated with the institutions of the country, and that the man who took him on this severe mental scamper was not only an amiable host, but a landholder and custos rotolorum, which she helpfully did not define. Was his endurance aided also by the reflection that Mr. Brooke was the uncle of Dorthea? Certainly he seemed more and more bent on making her talk to him, on drawing her out, as Celia remarked to herself, and in looking at her, his face was often lit up by a smile, like pale wintry sunshine. Before he left the next morning, while taking a pleasant walk with Miss Brooke along the gravelled terrace, he had mentioned to her that he felt the disadvantage of loneliness, the need of that cheerful companionship which the presence of youth can lighten or vary the serious tolls of maturity. And he delivered this statement with as much careful precision as if he had been a diplomatic envoy whose words would be attended with results. Indeed, Mr. Casaubon was not used to expect that he should have to repeat or revise his communications of a practical or personal kind. The inclinations which he had deliberately stated on the 2nd of October he would think it enough to refer to by the mention of that date, judging by the standard of his own memory, which was a volume where a vide supra could serve instead of repetitions, and not the ordinary long-used blotting book, which only tells of forgotten writing. But in this case, Mr. Casaubon's confidence was not likely to be falsified, for Dorthea heard and retained what he had said with the eager interest of a fresh young nature to which every variety in experience is an epoch. It was 3 o'clock in the beautiful breezy autumn day when Mr. Casaubon drove off to his rectory at Lowick, only 5 miles from Tipton, and Dorthea, who had on her bonnet and shawl, hurried along the shrubbery and across the park that she might wander through the bordering wood with no other visible companionship than that of Monk, the great St. Bernard dog, who always took care of the young ladies in their walks. Monk is a fantastic name for a Great Bernard. Does anybody want to get a Great Bernard and name him Monk with me? Oh, LA is probably the worst place on the planet to have a Great Bernard. I think the water tastes. This is my hot take right now. My hot tea take. I think I can taste the LA water in this cup more than I can taste my caramel chai, which is upsetting, as you know. There had risen before her the girl's vision of a possible future for herself, to which she looked forward with trembling hope, and she wanted to wander on in that visionary future without interruption. She walked briskly in the brisk funny. She walked briskly in the brisk air, the color rose in her cheeks, and her straw bonnet, which our contemporaries might look at with conjectural curiosity, as at an obsolete form of basket, fell a little backward. She would perhaps be hardly characterized enough if it were admitted that she wore her brown hair flatly braided and coiled behind her, so as to expose the outline of her head in a daring manner at a time when public feeling required the meagreness of nature to be dissimulated by a tall barricade of frizzled curls and bows, never surpassed by any great race except by the Fijian. Don't know what that is. This was a trait of Miss Brooks' asceticism. Yes. But there was nothing of an ascetic expression in her bright, full eyes as she looked before her, not consciously seeing, but absorbing into the intensity of her mood the solemn glory of the afternoon, with its long swaths of light between the far off rows of limes, whose shadows touched each other. All people, young or old, that is, all people in those ante-reform times, would have thought her an interesting object if they had referred the glow in her eyes and cheeks to the newly awakened ordinary images of young love, the illusions of Chloe about Strephon. Come on, man, Strephon? I want a name like Strephon. The illusions of Chloe about Strephon have been sufficiently consecrated in poetry, as the pathetic loveliness of all spontaneous trust ought to be. Miss Pippin, adoring young Pumpkin and dreaming along endless vistas of unwearying companionship, was a little drama which never tired our fathers and mothers, and had been put into all costumes. Let but Pumpkin have a figure which would sustain the disadvantages of the short-waisted swallowtail, and everybody felt it not only natural, but necessary to the perfection of womanhood, that a sweet girl should be at once convinced of his virtue, his exceptional ability, and above all, his perfect sincerity. But perhaps no persons then living, certainly none in the neighborhood of Tipton, would have had a sympathetic understanding for the dreams of a girl whose notions about marriage took their color entirely from an exalted enthusiasm about the ends of life, an enthusiasm which was lit chiefly by its own fire, and included neither the niceties of the trousseau, the pattern of plate, nor even the honors and sweet joys of the blooming matron. It had now entered Dorthea's mind that Mr. Casaubon might wish to make her his wife, and the idea that he would do so touched her with a sort of reverential gratitude. How good of him! Nay, it would be almost as if a winged messenger had suddenly stood beside her path and held out his hand towards her. For a long while she had been oppressed by the indefiniteness which hung in her mind, like a thick summer haze, over all her desire, to make her life greatly effective. What could she do? What ought she to do? She hardly more than a budding woman, but yet with an active conscience and a great mental need, not to be satisfied by a girlish instruction comparable to the nibblings and judgments of a discursive mouse. With some endowment of stupidity and conceit, she might have thought that a Christian young lady of fortune should find her ideal of life in village charities, patronage of the humbler clergy, and the perusal of female scripture characters unfolding the private experience of Sarah under the old dispensation, and Dorcas under the new, and take the care of her soul over the embroidery in her own boudoir, with a background of prospective marriage to a man who, if less strict than herself as being involved in affairs religiously inexplicable, might be prayed for and seasonably extorted. I don't know. From such contentment poor Dorthea was shut out. The intensity of her religious disposition, the coercion it exercised over her life, was but one aspect of a nature altogether ardent, theoretic, and intellectually consequent. And with such a nature, struggling in the bands of a narrow teaching, hemmed in by a social life which seemed nothing but a labyrinth of petty courses, a walled-in maze of small paths that led no whither, the outcome was sure to strike others at once as at once exaggeration and inconsistency. The thing which seemed to her best. I got a drink. Delicious. The thing which seemed to her best she wanted to justify by the completest knowledge, and not to live in a pretended mission of rules which were never acted on. Into this soul hunger as yet all her youthful passion was poured. The union which attracted her was one that would deliver her from her girlish subjection to her own ignorance, and give her the freedom of voluntary submission to a guide who would take her along the grandest path. I should learn everything then, she said to herself, still walking quickly along the bridle road through the wood. It would be my duty to study that I might help him in the better of his great works. There would be nothing trivial about our lives. Everyday things with us would mean the greatest things. It would be like marrying Pascal. I should learn to see the truth by the same light as great men have seen it by. And then I should know what to do when I got older. I should see how it was possible to lead a grand life here, now, in England. I don't feel sure about doing good in any way now. Everything seems like going on a mission to a people whose language I don't know. Unless it were built in good cottages. There can be no doubt about that. Oh, I hope I should be able to get the people well housed in Lowick. I will draw plenty of plans when I have time. Dorthea checked herself suddenly with self-rebuke for the presumptuous way in which she was reckoning on uncertain events. But she was spared any inward effort to change the direction of her thoughts by the appearance of a cantering horseman round a turning of the road. The well-groomed chestnut and two beautiful setters. Shivank! Hello! Hello! Welcome! I did no warning at all for this, so I'm very glad to see you here. I have missed you dearly, missed you so dearly. I just really felt in the mood for some devastating prose tonight. So that's why we're here. I'm like, honestly, oh my god, I love that. Trek 4 brings everyone together. Yeah, I just like I don't understand. Like I want to say like 20% of the sentences I read, but I'm along for the ride and I'm having a good time. What I really want is I really want her to write a deeply depressed character because I know that that will devastate me. And that is what I seek in a novel. I got my cup of tea. I really, really want to be emotionally devastated. That's what I crave. Okay. That's actually a lie. Please don't emotionally devastate me. Anyone out there? If anyone out there is thinking about emotionally devastating me, don't do that. I can only take fictional emotional devastation. True emotional devastation, I am currently unequipped to deal with. So please keep that in mind. Okay. Where am I? Dorthea checked herself suddenly with self-rebuke for the presumptuous way in which she was reckoning on uncertain events. I have been there, Dorthea. But she was spared any inward effort to change the direction of her thoughts by the appearance of yeah, I did that. The well-groomed chestnut. Yeah, I did that too. Never mind. Okay, well, we're doing it again. The well-groomed chestnut horse and two beautiful setters could leave no doubt that the rider was Sir James Chetham. He discerned Dorthea, jumped off his horse at once, and having delivered it to his groom, advanced toward her with something white on his arm, at which the two setters were barking in an excited manner. How delightful to meet you, Miss Brooke, he said, raising his hat and showing his sleekly waving blonde hair. Ooh, it has hastened the pleasure I was looking forward to. I don't know about you, but I don't trust any men with sleekly waving blonde hair. That's a red flag right there, ladies. Miss Brooke was annoyed at the interruption, as were we all, Miss Brooke. This amiable, true. It's like when Prince Charming, I think about this all the time, when he takes off the helmet and he like shakes his hair. I'm like, I want that for me. I want that for me. Yeah, I get your references, Shiv. Um, okay, here I am. Here I am. Okay. This amiable baronet, really a suitable husband for Celia, exaggerated the necessity of making himself agreeable to the elder sister. Even a prospective brother-in-law may be an oppression if he will always be presupposing too good and understanding with you, and agreeing with you even when you contradict him. The thought that he had made the mistake of paying his addresses to herself could not take shape. All her mental activity was used up in persuasions of another kind. But he was positively obtrusive at this moment, and his dimpled hands were quite disagreeable. Her roused temper made her color deeply, and as she returned his greeting with some haughtiness. Oh, thank you. I'm using a new shampoo right now that's making it really wily, and it's just a lot to deal with. It's a bar shampoo because I'm saving the environment, but I don't know if I can put up with it. Where was I? Oop, there we go. Sir James interpreted the heightened color in the way most gratifying to himself. Love that. And thought he never saw Miss Brooke looking so handsome. What like a douche thing to do. Love that for Sir James's truly living truly living life without social anxiety. I have brought a little petitioner, he said. Or rather, I have brought him to see if he will be approved before his petition is offered. He showed the white object under his arm, which was a tiny Maltese puppy, one of nature's most naive toys. It is painful to me to see these creatures that are bred merely as pets, said Dorthea, whose opinion was forming itself that very moment, as opinions will, under the heat of irritation. Yes! Oh, why? Said Sir James as they walked forward. That's by far, so far, my favorite quote from all of the texts that we've read. Colonel Brandon, move over. Oh, why? Is now my favorite. I believe all the petting that is given them does not make them happy. They're too helpless. Their lives are too frail. A weasel or a mouse that gets its own living is more interesting. I like to think that the animals about us have souls something like our own, and either carry on their own little affairs or can be companions to us, like Monk here. Those creatures are parasitic. I am so glad I know that you do not like them, said good Sir James. I should never keep them for myself, but ladies are usually fond of these Maltese dogs. Here, John, take this dog, will you? Drops the dog. The objectionable puppy, whose nose and eyes were equally black and expressive, was thus got rid of, since Miss Brooke decided that it had better not have been born. Oof! But she felt it necessary to explain. You must not judge Celia's feelings from mine. I think she likes these small pets. She had a tiny terrier once, which she was very fond of. It made me unhappy because I was afraid of treading on it. I am rather short-sighted. Imagine being like, hey babe, I stepped on your dog. She is no longer okay. You have your own opinion about everything, Miss Brooke, and it is always a good opinion. What answer was possible to such stupid complimenting? Damn! Do you know, I envy you that, Sir James said as they continued walking at the rather brisk pace set by Dorthea. I don't quite understand what you mean. Your power of forming an opinion. I can form an opinion of persons. I know I like people, but about other matters, do you know, I have often a difficulty in deciding. One hears very sensible things said on opposite sides. Or that seem sensible. Perhaps we don't always discriminate between sense and nonsense. Dorothea felt that she was rather rude. Exactly, said Sir James, but you seem to have the power of discrimination. Never heard it phrased like that before. On the contrary, I am often unable to decide. But that is from ignorance. The right conclusion is they are all the same, though I am unable to see it. I think there are a few who would see it more readily. Do you know, Lovegood was telling me yesterday that you had the best notion in the world of a plan for cottages. Quite wonderful for a young lady, he thought. You had a real genius, to use his expression. He said you wanted Mr. Brooke to build a new set of cottages, but he seemed to think it hardly probable that your uncle would consent. Do you know, that is one of the things that I wish to do. I mean, on my own estates. I should be so glad to carry out that plan of yours if you would let me see it. Of course, it is sinking money. That is why people object to it. Laborers can never pay rent to make it answer. But after all, it is worth doing. Imagine a guy trying to hit on you and being like, "So, can I build a bunch of cottages for you? Like, would that be cool? Can I just." No, you cannot build my cottages, good sir. Build someone else's cottages. Worth doing, yes, indeed, said Dorothea energetically, forgetting her previous small vexations. I think we deserve to be beaten out of beautiful houses with a Scrooge of small cords. All of us who let tenants live in such sights as we see round us. Life in cottages must be happier than ours, if they were real houses fit for human beings from whom we expect duties and affections. Will you show me your plan? Yes, certainly. Excuse me. I dare say it is very faulty, but I have been examining all the plans for cottages in Loudon's book and picked out what seemed the best things. What happiness it would be to set the pattern about about here. This is one of the several cottages I've built for you. I think instead of Lazarus at the gate, we should put the pigsty cottages outside the park gate. What? Dorothea was in the best temper now. Sir James, as a brother-in-law, building model cottages on his estate, and then perhaps others being built at Lowick, and more elsewhere in imitation. It would be as if the spirit of Oberlin had passed over the parishes to make the life of poverty beautiful. Oop! Sir James saw all the plans and took one away to consult upon with Lovegood. He also took away a complacent sense that he was making great progress in Miss Brooke's good opinion. The Maltese puppy was not offered to Celia, an omission which Dorothea afterwards thought of with surprise. Oh, Dorothea. But she blamed herself for it. She had been engrossing Sir James. After all, it was a relief that there was no puppy to tread upon. Celia was present when the plans were being examined and observed Sir James' illusion. He thinks that Dodo cares about him, and she only cares about her plans. Yet I am not certain that she would refuse him if she thought he would let her manage everything and carry out all her notions. How very uncomfortable Sir James would be. I cannot bear notions. It was Celia's private luxury to indulge in this dislike. She dared not confess it to her sister in any direct statement, for that would be laying herself open to a demonstration that she was somehow or other at war with all goodness. But on safe opportunities, she had an indirect mode of making her negative wisdom tell upon Dorothea, and calling her down from her rhapsodic mood by reminding her that people were staring, not listening. Celia was not impulsive. What she had to say could wait, and came from her always with the same quiet staccato evenness. When people talked with energy and emphasis, she watched their faces and features merely. She never could understand how well-bred persons consented to sing and open their mouths in the ridiculous manner requisite for that vocal exercise. I am shifting. I'm changing it up. Changing it up, friends. Things are moving. On the move. I'm like a little turtle. I had to turn the heat on, so I'm starting to get toasty, which is nice compared to freezing, which I have been. Okay. It was not many days before Mr. Casaubon paid a morning visit, on which he was invited again for the following week to dine and stay the night. That was a bad wink. Sorry, everybody. Thus Dorothea had 3 more conversations with him, and was convinced that her first impression had been just. He was all that she had imagined him to be. Almost everything he had said seemed like a specimen from a mine.
or the inscription on the door of a museum which might open on the treasures of past ages. And this trust in his mental wealth was all the deeper and more effective on her inclination because it was now obvious that his visits were made for her sake. This accomplished man condescended to think of a young girl and take the pains to talk to her, not with absurd compliment, but with an appeal to her understanding, and sometimes with instructive correction. What delightful companionship! Mr. Casaubon seemed even unconscious that trivialities existed, and never handed round that small talk of heavy men, which is as acceptable as stale bride cake brought forth with an odor of cupboard. He talked of what he was interested in, or else he was silent and bowed with sad civility. To Dorthea, this was adorable genius, and religious abstinence from the artificiality which uses up the soul in the efforts of pretense. For she looked as reverently at Mr. Casaubon's religious elevation above herself as she did at his intellect and learning. He assented to her expressions of devout feeling, and usually with an appropriate quotation. He allowed himself to say that he had gone through some spiritual conflicts in his youth. In short, Dorothea saw that here she might reckon on understanding, sympathy, and guidance. On one, only one, of her favorite themes was she disappointed. Mr. Casaubon apparently did not care about building cottages, and diverted the talk to the extremely narrow accommodation which was to be had in the dwellings of the ancient Egyptians, as if to check a too high standard. After he was done, beep, 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 beep. After he was done, Dorothea dwelt with some agitation on this indifference of his, and her mind was much exercised with arguments drawn from the varying conditions of climate which modify human needs, and from the admitted wickedness of pagan despots. Should she not urge these arguments on Mr. Casaubon when he came again? But further reflection told her that she was presumptuous in demanding his attention to such a subject. He would not disapprove of her occupying herself with it in leisure moments, as other women expected to occupy themselves with their dress and embroidery. Would not forbid it when, Dorothea felt rather ashamed as she detected herself in these speculations. But her uncle had been invited to go to Lowick to stay a couple of days, and it was blah blah blah. Was it reasonable to suppose that Mr. Casaubon delighted in Mr. Brooke's society for its own sake, either with or without documents? What is happening? Meanwhile, that little disappointment made her delight the more in Sir James Chetham's readiness to set foot on the desired improvements. He came much oftener than Mr. Casaubon, and Dorothea ceased to find him disagreeable, since he showed himself so entirely in earnest. For he had already entered with much practical ability into Lovegood's estimates, and was charmingly docile. She proposed to build a couple of cottages and transfer two families from their old cabins, which could then be pulled down so that new ones could be built on the old sites. Sir James said, "Exactly," and she bore the word in remarkably well. Certainly, these men who had so few spontaneous ideas might be very useful members of society under good feminine direction, if they were fortunate in choosing their sisters-in-law. It is difficult to say whether there was or was not a little wilfulness in her continuing blind to the possibility that another sort of choice was in question in relation to her. But her life was just now full of hope and action. She was not only thinking of her plans, but getting down learned books from the library and reading many things hastily, that she might be a little less ignorant in talking to Mr. Casaubon, all the while being visited with conscientious questionings, whether she were not exalting these poor doings above measure and contemplating them with that self-satisfaction which was the last doom of ignorance and folly. Good Lord, that chapter was truthfully 40 minutes long, and let me just tell you this, I'm tired as heck. So I am not going to do another one this good evening. I think I am going to watch some bad TV and pass the heck out. You know, what makes me really happy nowadays? Sleeping. I get really excited to sleep. I'm just like really pumped about. I love this. I'm like flipping through to see what the little like intro chapters are, and one of them's just in Italian, as though I know Italian enough to be able to discern it. To, like what? Yeah, buongiorno. Like my Italian is like Brad Pitt in Inglorious Bastards. Buongiorno. All right, my friends. Thank you for. Oh, I got a text from you 4 minutes ago. What have I done? Oh my goodness! Thank you so much, Shim. This is the kindest. Look at him. I love that. Patricia has a great story about how she tried to make turtle shoe buns and it went very badly for her. Okay. Well, thank you for tuning in for this extremely impromptu. Um, we'll see. I might do it again tomorrow, but I'm making no promises because I truthfully cannot make any promises because there are so many things that I did not do today that I have to do tomorrow. So, excuse me. With all that being said, to quote ABBA, when all is said and done, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thanks for coming in. It was really nice. And I will see you when I see you, which is hopefully soon. But if not, toodaloo and good night to all. And to all a good night. Goodbye.